Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Here with Greg, I want to introduce what we're going to be doing here on a weekly basis. This one is going to be a little easy. We're going to talk about Greg, learn about his background, how he kind of gets involved with TRYP, and that kind of stuff. But going forward, do you want this to be interactive? If there's questions, or things people want to see in videos, please leave them below. We will cover, of course, the company, the industry, and if you think there's anything that relates to either the company or Greg and his background, please drop it below. Would love to answer some questions, talk about some cool stuff. And again, thanks for everyone for being here. But Greg, time to kick things off. First things first, how are you?
Great, man. Good to see you, Jason. I'm doing terrific. It's kind of a sunny day down here in Southern California. How about
Yeah,
you?
no, awesome. Well, thanks for making everyone jealous, of course, in California. So thanks. But here,
Sorry
I'd
about
love
that.
to kick things off. Kind of first, usually start like where you went to school, first couple jobs, and I know that's probably early, but we'll go through kind of your career
Yeah,
and how you get involved with TRYP.
yeah, that's a long way back, brother. But yeah, happy to. So yeah, I went to school in Seattle, Washington, at the University of Washington years back, studied economics, and my first jobs actually were in Tokyo, Japan. So first with a Japanese bank that was called Yasuda Trust at the time. It's now part of the Mizuho Group. And I managed, I was a fund manager. I managed $550 million, believe it or not, in the Japanese equity market during their heyday, which was a job I was completely unqualified to do, but right place, right time, and a fantastic opportunity. And that 1 year position ended up being a 7-year stint for me. So I was at Yasuda for a period of time, and I moved over to Union Bank of Switzerland, otherwise known as UBS, of course, as everyone knows. I worked on the derivatives trading desk there, again, in the Japanese equity market, which was fantastic. And then I kind of capped that little 7-year stint in Tokyo with a 2-year position as an aide to the former foreign minister of the country, which was just a crazy thing again to do. But yeah, I kind of like got shot out of a cannon after leaving undergraduate school in Seattle and launched myself straight into Tokyo.
Okay, we gotta unpack that a little bit. How do you go from
Sure, man.
school in the U.S., growing up in the U.S. to Japan?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, like I didn't grow up in Seattle. I grew up in this small town in Eastern Washington that no one has ever, you've never heard of. You're
Yeah.
never going to go there. It's about 200 clicks south of Kelowna, actually. And in fact, it's very much like Kelowna, BC, but a great little community to grow up. My dad was a doctor. He was a physician, which, has some kind of ties now to what I'm doing, obviously.
Yeah.
And my mother was an entrepreneur. So I kind of got a little bit of those genes. And she was also a musician. She's a clarinetist. So that, yeah, that all that kind of, yeah, was the beginnings of crazy story from there.
So then, what's the move to Japan? Was it like, is it a, hey, I'm young, I'm feeling adventurous, I want to go to Japan, or was that just, wow, this opportunity I can't turn down? Like, give me that. I know it's like so
Yeah.
early, but for a lot of people, I know a lot of people watching this, definitely in psychedelics, a little younger, maybe would love the inspiration. So
Yeah.
curious.
So it was a couple things. So, it was definitely crazy, right? I mean, having grown up in this pretty domestic, small little town, I
Yeah.
had an opportunity to do this 1-year internship through an exchange program called ISEC that's based out of Europe. So essentially it's a job exchange for college students, right?
Mhm.
Usually for 6 months, maybe 12 months. Mine was a little bit on the longer side of 12 months that again ended up being 7. But there's 2 things that you had to decide on the application. One was, what industry do you want to work in? And the other was, what country? And when I was graduating from University of Washington, Japan was on fire, right? Japan was taking over the world. Toyota was, selling tons of cars, more than just about anybody. They were buying real
Yeah.
estate in LA and New York. I mean, it was just quite the heyday. So I was really, frankly, interested in like, what the heck are these guys doing to build such a fantastic opportunity and such a great
Yeah.
economy, right? So frankly, I was just really curious. And the other thought was that I figured that if there's any time to go into a really challenging country, where you don't speak the language, where you can't read anything, everything's in kanji, like there's no way that you can tell what's on billboards and things like that. So I decided that it would be much easier to do that in my younger years than to say, when I was older, like I am now, and a lot more challenging than say going to France or Germany or, somewhere in Western Europe where, at least the culture is a little bit more similar and you can probably kind of navigate your way around the language because it's so, it's a Latin based system. So it
Yeah.
was really those 2 things, just one, curiosity about what in the
Yeah.
heck are these guys doing to build such a great economy? And second of all, the challenge of like taking on such a different culture and a different language.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, take the leap of faith, pay it off. That's awesome. No, great story. So here, now walk me through. So, like you started off unqualified, managing way too much money. And then walk me through, obviously, find some success there. You do, do some traveling. You say you're in Switzerland, and now walk me through how we go from, banking, trading, now like give me the in between to
Right.
where all of a sudden you're kind of in psychedelics.
Well, there's a really great connector point, right? So, as I said, my father was a physician, right? So he was a GP, essentially, general practitioner. He's an internist focused on infectious disease and oncology in this small little town at this clinic that he was chairman of. And my uncle was an anesthesiologist at Cedars-Sinai in LA, and my aunt on that side of the family has a PhD in nursing and taught at UCLA. So there's a whole bunch
So
of
you're
like,
you're the weird guy who went to school for economics, and your whole
right,
family.
exactly. So like I skip all that stuff. I go to economics. I get into banking, think I'm going to be a banker, right? And what happened for me was that I was literally, I'll never forget it. I was on the trading floor in UBS's office in Tokyo, right? And you could hear a pin drop, and I was, because that market just skyrocketed and then it completely crashed. And after it crashed, all the volume in the market completely dried up. Like initially the volatility was fantastic. You can make gobs of money arbing the market and all that kind of stuff. But then as the volatility dropped, there was nothing to do. And you could hear a pin drop. So I'm sitting there on the trading floor thinking, what am I doing? This is crazy. Like I really wanted to kind of figure out where there's great value creation and how you really make a big difference, with new products. And I came to this conclusion that I really wanted to be an entrepreneur and work in early, companies, because it was pretty clear to me that if you get a little bit of technology, some great people, and just a dollop of capital, so you put people, capital, technology together in the right configuration, you can make a lot of stuff happen, as we've seen over and over and over, right? Especially here, in California and in Silicon Valley. And so that was sort of the inspiration for me. It was like, well, I got to get out of banking and I need to get into something. And that get into something was entrepreneurship. And for me, I use business school. I use Wharton Business School as my segue into the life science field. So it was the inspiration of, well, I want to get out of banking. I want to get deep into companies to really understand how they function. And while I was at business school, I ended up, really kind of looking at two different paths. Either I was going to go kind of the software tech side of things, or go into life sciences. And given all the family history I've got in the healthcare space, and frankly, I was thinking that, wow, in a relevant time frame for my career, it was all going to be about life sciences. And so I decided was just going to jump in head first into healthcare, into biotech. And that's what I did, post Wharton.
Wow. What an incredible story. And obviously, I'm sure people are going to have questions. We can dive into it. But okay. Wow. So get into life sciences, okay. Hey, it's time to be, but not a doctor. Life sciences, entrepreneurship, perfect mix, biotech, tons of success there. Now walk me through. So what's your first entrepreneurial journey in biotech and life sciences?
Yeah, so it is kind of interesting, right? I sort of like skipped the whole idea of treating patients. So
Yeah.
a little side note. So I realized that there's no way I could become a doctor, and that happened for me when I was in the OR, in the operating room, with my next door neighbor, who's a cardiologist, right? So he's a cardiovascular surgeon. Actually, he's a cardiovascular surgeon specifically, and Dr. Chris Dollar is his name, and he had invited me into a surgery to watch him put a pacemaker into a patient, right? So I'm all, gowned up and all that in the OR. And about 5 minutes into the case, I was literally on the floor because I had passed out right from after he drew blood from the patient. And so it was at that moment I realized, wow, I can't be a doctor, but I was really interested in the healthcare space. And I felt like that combination of actually working more in the corporate business development, finance, marketing side in a life science, drug development, biotech company would be a good fit. So that was a lot of my thought process. And then for me, at this point, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's not entrepreneurial in the way that like most of us think, right? I didn't sort of go hide out and start a company from scratch. I joined this little company. It's not so little, at least it wasn't at the time, and it wasn't after it got acquired. Little company called Genzyme up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right in Boston, of course. And they were an early biotech company. Henry Tamir is the CEO. He's very well known in the industry, and I got kind of brought in under his inspiration, and worked in that company in a couple different areas. I was working in the genetics and diagnostics group under Dave Fleming, who mentored me my first year. And then as soon as the president of the international division discovered that I spoke Japanese, he said, "You're going to come work for us, and you're going to help get our product launched back in Japan and also throughout Asia." So my first kind of foray into entrepreneurship was doing that inside a big company. So even though it was a relatively decent sized company, publicly traded on NASDAQ, I think we had about we had a couple thousand employees, but it wasn't like a huge pharma company. It was just sort of on its way, and they had just launched a product several years before, but they were trying to launch it in all these other markets. So the entrepreneurial opportunity was to take that asset and launch it in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, mainland China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Australia, et cetera. So that was kind of my first foray. But for sure, I mean, I had kind of training wheels with the Genzyme structure around me, but it was really a fantastic opportunity because we could, all of us in these separate markets in that particular team were really free to build our company, our group on our own. And you literally started with one person yourself in that region and had to build it from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, literally, and of course, you have the resources, great backing. You get plunked down wherever, and you basically build the company in that region. So incredible. What a story, and what an awesome way to kind of get your feet wet entrepreneurial wise. Now walk me through. So you build them up in these countries, and then did it get to a point where it didn't feel like an entrepreneurial journey anymore, and you're like on to the next? Give me the story.
Right. Well, so for me, when I was back in Philadelphia at Wharton, as I was sort of making the decision of, do I work in life sciences or do I work in the tech sector? I actually had jobs in both of those. And the conundrum was that I had a job in the tech sector in California, and I had a job in the life science field in Cambridge, in Boston. But I really, really wanted to move to California. I'm not originally from California. As I said earlier, I'm from Washington State, and I was dying to move to California. And so after I'd been at Genzyme for a relatively, modest period of time, that's, I really wanted to be right in the middle of entrepreneurship. So I literally, was in Boston. They sent me to Singapore. I did another, kind of stint out in Asia, running all the markets there as the general manager. And I up and quit, and I moved from Singapore to Menlo Park to literally be right in the center of Silicon Valley, specifically around the early stage healthcare companies. Because for me, I realized that a critical element in the biotech space was getting very close to early stage drug development and trying to parse out, how do you find or create, winning compounds in this field. And I felt like I was never going to get that experience working in a relatively large, company like Genzyme.
Yeah. Well, so now talk to me origin stories for TRYP. How do you get involved in TRYP? How does this come about?
Yeah. So the entrepreneur's journey is always it's a bit meandering, right? And the way I like to look at it is it's just because I'm meandering doesn't mean I'm lost. I'm trying to find something in particular, right? And so I spent some time post Genzyme and another two other publicly traded biotech companies. One of them I became the CEO of. It was public on the Toronto Exchange.
Which one? Curious for the people listening.
Yeah, it's called Inventa Biopharmaceuticals. We were creating a novel immunotherapeutic product for cervical dysplasia, for HPV. So another fascinating journey that we can get into at some other point. But along the way, I did a couple of things that kind of led me to TRYP. One was that I was a CEO of a startup accelerator down here called Connect, and we had lots and hundreds of companies coming through. So I created quite a playbook of what was the best practices, for entrepreneurs in terms of their pitch decks, how they're raising capital, their connections, as well as, frankly, a really great network in the community down here. But it was really itching to do two things, which is to get deeply involved in companies as an operator, and also, frankly, to invest my own capital. So along the way, I founded a venture firm with my partner of mine at Torrent Ventures. Between my experience at Connect and Torrent, I made 13 different angel investments or corporate investments. And that, kind of like really blended my experience in investing and also, operating. But along the way, I ran into, a good friend of mine who I've known for 20 plus years, Bill Gardner, who's a founder of TRYP. I've always been very interested in up and coming novel assets and compounds in the drug development space. Bill's a good friend. He had founded this organization, and he asked me to join the board. So back in January, I joined the board. Became chair in February, and then it became pretty clear that we needed to do some things to strengthen the management team. And I just felt like this was going to be a fantastic opportunity to jump in, primarily because one, it's an up and coming field in the life science space. And secondly, psilocybin and DMT and all these other psychedelic compounds are naturally derived, and they have an incredible amount of history, a great safety profile for the most part. And also a lot of work has been done to provide evidence that there's likely activity for these compounds in very significant diseases. So I felt like this is a really terrific place to really dig in and spend a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, no, interesting, and we'll do a deep dive into TRYP, obviously, coming forward. So yeah, some people, it's funny they say, oh, like, I don't know how I got locked into the CEO role,
Right.
but for you, you're like, yep, board, chairman, CEO, next, all this span of, not like pretty short time frame. Awesome to hear that not only you wanted the role, but obviously it sounds like you're the perfect fit for it. But walk me through now, in kind of the last question for you. What's the day to day, week to week look like for, the CEO of TRYP?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's fascinating. It's like I've always kind of said that like becoming CEO is just essentially the right to work your tail off, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like day to day is just like it's like two fire hoses a day, with email traffic, talking to investors, talking to the media, working with our R&D teams, working with our academic collaborators. There's a lot of different things that are coming across my desk on a real regular basis. But probably the thing I enjoy about it the most is one, sort of being in the middle of the hub of activity and having a 360-degree view of everything that's going on. And then frankly, working with a really strong team, from the board, from our scientific advisory board, from our collaborators, from my internal team, just being able to work with such a great group of individuals is really quite a blessing. And I feel incredibly grateful for that opportunity. But yeah, it's, like, especially, these days, as we were kind of talking before we got started, right? I mean, like I sit here in this office in my house during COVID, like, I don't know how many hours, I don't even count the hours. I mean, 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. I know that there's been at least a couple of times when I've been here, I've never left my house for, I think it's been 2 or 3 days. And I literally like, I got to get outside and go somewhere, man. I'm like, just like here on Zoom and
Hey,
on my cell
COVID's
phone.
increasing efficiency for sure, of
Yeah.
productivity. The days blend together, but this was awesome. Great. This is one of the best interviews I've done. Thank you so much for doing this, and what a
Thank
background. And I
you.
know with so many different points, please, if people have questions, drop them below. We definitely want it to be interactive, and going forward, you mentioned all these things coming across your desk. We're gonna cover a lot of them in these videos. What's the R&D process like? What's happening? Where's the space going? And a lot of cool things that we'll get your feedback on. But great. Thanks so much for joining. This was an awesome first video.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jason. Great to be here. Nice to see you, and look forward to our next conversation.